So, Kat, the floor is yours.
That means I have to figure out screen sharing. 1 second. So we will go. It's been very odd for me switching from a Google environment to a Microsoft environment. All right. So hopefully y'all can see this presentation.
Sure can.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Kat Eschel. I started about 2 months ago at the MBTA as the new Senior Director of Climate Policy and Planning. And so just for background as to where I was before that, prior to this role, I was working for the city of Boston for about 6 years. Most recently as chief of staff for the Environment, Energy, and Open Space Cabinet. But sort of prior to that, I had worked on a range of equitable decarbonization policy matters, climate resilience issues, air quality and transportation policy and planning initiatives. And so my personal background is really environmental science and policy. Sort of worked prior to the city in sort of international government, sustainable urban consulting, nonprofit policy work. So a little bit of a jill of all trades situation. And really excited to be building out this team. I actually have two staff members who are joining me this month to really build out our climate policy and planning muscle here. And we'll be looking to kickstart implementation and catalyze some of the work that's already ongoing that is contained in this assessment that I'm previewing for you today. And so this presentation, so I had talked to Brian about sort of the content to bring today. We had brought this presentation to the board back in April. So if you had caught up on that meeting and this looks a little familiar, it's because it is familiar, but looking forward to having a discussion with y'all. So the larger context for this is during Climate Week in September 2023, the T had provided an overview of some of its efforts to address sustainability and resilience to date. And one of the big announcements that was made back in September of last year was that the authority would develop a new climate policy and planning team. And so that is the team that I am tasked with creating, and that will be working to decrease the authorities and, by extension, the Commonwealth's environmental footprint and work to increase the resilience of our transit system. And so in anticipation of that team being created, the Policy and Strategic Planning Division, which is the division in which I'm housed under Chief Lindsay Heffernan, they worked with the MBTA's environmental department to undertake what we're calling a climate assessment. So really trying to identify some of the larger organizational needs that are required to move this work forward. And so going to take some time today to review a little bit about sort of the process and context that we're doing this in, what was some of what we learned, and give a sense of some of our next steps and what to expect. So the broader context for this is that last year, the MBTA updated its values and developed 8 long-term strategic goals to guide our work. And so sustainability is one of those key themes. It's one of our 5 core values. And so the value statement there is about investing resources wisely for our team, our communities, and our environment. We had also worked to develop a goal that is focused on increasing the sustainability and resilience of the transit system. That being said, would also love to call attention to the 7th goal over here on the right-hand side to attract new riders, retain existing riders, and increase the percentage of transit trips in the region, because that's also a vital component of what it means for the MBTA to be a sustainable organization, by increasing the number of people taking transit and being in and of itself a solution for the transportation sector. And so the goals that are set here are also consistent with MassDOT's long-range plan that's in development beyond mobility, and it is aligned with the Commonwealth's larger approach to achieving its climate goals. A little bit as to why we view resilience as being critical. So we're developing this climate assessment to plan the next steps that are necessary to protect our transit system, our employees, our riders, really also our operations in the face of a changing climate. So the way we're really thinking about this is that a resilient MBTA is critical to ensuring continuity and reliability of service. By making our system resilient, by making it energy efficient and reducing how much it takes to power our system, we're working to improve our ability to deliver high quality service that is safe and reliable. And so this is really part of achieving that sort of really close companion goal of increasing motion, because ultimately this just helps to grow the confidence in our system and it helps support the regional economy. I think everybody can remember the winter storms of 2015, where our service was disrupted for an extended period of time, and we expect climate events like that to happen more frequently. And so it's about how are we able to build our system and operate our system in such a way that our recovery time shortens and we can help get people where it is that they need to go. Implementing sustainability is also part of delivering on the Haley Driscoll administration's commitments to climate. So our assessment really tried to take a bird's eye view and understand, okay, what are all the policies and laws in place on the books now? What is the policy framework in which we're operating? And how can we make sure that we're delivering on all the expectations that are placed on us, but also delivering on our own core goals? So our assessment builds on the Climate Chief's 180-day report that was released in October of last year, as well as MBTA action steps are outlined in the Resilient Mass Plan, which was released back in September of last year. We're also going to be working closely to coordinate with the new MassDOT Climate PMO. So there are also then several policies and regulations that are also calling on the MBTA to reduce its emissions and become more resilient. So there's the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is sort of the larger context that sets goals for the transportation subsector. But then more recently in the 2022 climate bill, there were some requirements placed on the MBTA around zero emission passenger bus requirements and sort of shifting our bus fleet over to a zero emission solution, as well as some EV charging station requirements. So thinking in particular about commuter rail and integration with some of MassDOT's efforts on service plazas. There's also just some standard environmental regulations that apply to us. 310 CMR 7.71 is sort of the requirement under which we report our greenhouse gas emissions as large emitters for some of our sort of point source facilities. So in terms of this assessment, we're trying to respond to a context that is changing all the time. So there's a lot of external drivers for action as well. And so by engaging in sort of this proactive planning, we're really trying to enable ourselves to be less reactive and to set ourselves up for success. So we want to be able to address these climate hazards like instances like the winter storm of 2015 or flooding that we already see sort of in some sunny day flooding locations like Aquarium. So being able to address those climate hazards that really do present an existential threat to our operations and economic sustainability. We've been trying to do a lot of work to understand that vulnerability. So for scale, some research that we supported last year indicated that in 2030, we are at risk of up to $39 million in annual losses from coastal flooding solely for our rapid transit system. So not even accounting for issues like what we experienced with the flash floods in Leominster last year. And so those actually annual losses actually used to be 64 million a year, but just by virtue of installing those floodplains at Aquarium to help provide protection to that station during flooding, that took us down to 39 million. So that was a really critical step that we've already taken. And so looking to take additional steps in that space. Another sort of key component that we're thinking about is making sure that our power needs are met. There is an increasing amount of pressure on the electric grid from the trends towards building and transportation electrification, in particular personal vehicles. We have to remember that we already have a partially electrified system and the demands to electrify our bus fleet, but then also looking down the line at other forms of transit that we provide. That's going to be a lot of pressure on an already strained grid. We ourselves operate a pretty large power system. And so being able to make sure that that is not only in a state of good repair, but it's also prepared for the demands that will be placed on it in the future and it's ready to deliver more capacity is going to be a key part of this work. There's also opportunities here that we're, of course, trying to capitalize on. So there is a larger dynamic of our regional grid getting greener with some of the requirements that are placed on it to serve green over time and trying to do our best to take advantage of funding opportunities as they come up in order to support projects that are related to climate. So turning to the assessment itself, this work was, I really want to acknowledge the work that the strategic transit planning team did on this, as well as the environmental department. So they sort of started a lot of this work and I've been sort of transitioning into it and taking it over. But it was really an offshoot of that strategic planning work that's been happening at the T. And so over the past 6 months, 9 months, we've been working with consultants. So working with Foley Hoag on some of the legal review, working with Arup on sort of the step planning piece to review relevant regulations, plans, programs, and policies around sustainability and resilience at the Commonwealth level, to just make sure that we are checking all the boxes that we can. We also did a lot of internal work, so worked with stakeholders across multiple departments, held workshops, so that we could take some time to review our current processes, understand where there are gaps in our current work, and to develop recommendations to provide sort of some initial next steps for where my climate team should be headed. And so this assessment is designed to help the authority to align our actions to meet a couple of different objectives. So how we can better incorporate sustainability and resilience into decision making, and how we prioritize our investments, strengthening our work with regional partners and ourselves being a stronger regional partner, so hopefully working a lot more with municipalities that are sort of thinking in the space as well, and improving our capacity to engage in those conversations, helping the Commonwealth to meet its larger climate goals, um, ultimately protecting our riders and our assets from the impacts of climate change, and then overall just doing a better job at tracking and also communicating our progress. I think sometimes that people view the MBTA as a little bit of a black box where they don't know what's going on. And that's been one of the most exciting things that I've been coming on board, is learning about all the existing work that is underway, but that isn't necessarily being communicated or talked about as climate initiatives, when there's a lot of work that actually is really, in essence, climate planning that is already happening. And so wanting to sort of be able to peel back the curtain on that a little bit more. So in terms of where we are, the other core message that I will be seeking to deliver from everywhere that I can is that a sustainable MBTA system contributes and is critical to meeting our net zero emissions goals as a Commonwealth. So we provide low carbon transportation for the region. So transportation is the largest source of emissions in Massachusetts. Our emissions represent less than 2% of the sector's total emissions, and those emissions are declining. Yet we also account for 10% of commuter trips in the Boston metro area, and we also serve more than just commuter trips. We just don't have great data to show what that represents. But really, what that means is that we're punching above our weight. As a climate actor, the MBTA will, of course, continue to decarbonize our operations and make our infrastructure resilient. But we really are working to highlight that, consistent with that goal of increasing transit trips in the region, our services themselves are a climate solution to the challenge of decarbonizing the transportation sector. So in terms of the theme of taking stock of what has been done, uh, we have taken significant actions already in energy decarbonization and resilience. So in the energy space, we've invested significantly into energy efficiency projects. So we've invested about 22 million. They yield 17 million back in annual savings. We're also working to just better account for our energy load in new projects so that we're not caught by surprise when suddenly we need to invest into our power systems. Um, and we've also been working to just be smarter about how we look at data. So we have an energy management system so that we can just better understand our load profiles across projects, and then build that into projects when we're going in and doing capital work, or other opportunities to invest in efficiency. To sort of decarbonize those operations, so outside of energy efficiency, we've been working really hard on our bus electrification plan. And so we've already started construction on several of those facilities, with more in planning. And we've also reduced our emissions by about 44% since our 2009 baseline. A fair bit of that is through purchasing RECs in order to have the entirety of our electricity load be offset. But we've also been able to reduce our actual energy consumption as well by about 20% since 2009. On the vulnerability side, a lot of this work was kickstarted after that winter storm in 2015, and there's been a lot of work since then to complete vulnerability assessments for a number of our critical assets. There's more to do, more underway, but we've looked at our rapid transit lines, a couple of our critical facilities, more assessments underway, as well as looked at our tunnel networks. We've also been working to sort of do a better job of mapping our infrastructure, and be able to sort of have a better understanding how storms might affect us in real time. And that's been helpful in informing some of our operational decisions during events like Hurricane Lee, for example. And then we've also been working over the years to already built in climate resilience and sustainability into scoring for CIP project evaluations, but we're going to be continuing to take a really close look as to how we can strengthen how capital planning aligns with our goals writ large, not just sustainability, but certainly our sustainability value is going to be really strongly represented in that conversation. And then obviously, we've also actually created a new climate policy and planning team, and that's in alignment with the climate chief's recommendations from her October 2023 report. So there's also, as I have indicated, a lot of work that is already underway. We're continuing to expand some of those data management systems, continuing to carry out infrastructure upgrades. We're looking at a couple of different renewable energy opportunities. On the decarbonization side, we're going to be enhancing our sustainable design standards. Some of that is already underway. We're installing EV chargers, we're upgrading station lighting, we're electrifying our bus fleet and facilities, and we are in the process of developing a facility master plan that's going to cover a lot of topics, but it is also considering sort of decarbonization and some of our resilience needs. Purely on the resilience side, there's some work related to some of the commitments that we made as part of Resilient Mass. So on sort of system-wide tunnel flood mitigation, as well as some just general improvements to improve our emergency responsibility. We're also going to be working to more strongly integrate resilience into design reviews and risk management. We already have a flood resiliency design directive, but what are some of the other components of resilience that we also need to build in? We're also continuing to identify grant funding opportunities, as well as complete those vulnerability assessments. We do have more than 75,000 assets and 65 facilities, so it's a lot of work, but the environmental department has been doing amazing work building those out, and we're continuing to really try to go priority by priority. And then obviously also already working with regional partners to develop adaptation strategies for priority infrastructure projects. An example of that is we've been engaged in the Belle Isle Marsh Working Group for a long time. Hannah Lyons Galante, I think, has really tried to engage deeply where there's been critical needs. And by growing the team, we're hoping to just be able to be present and to be an active partner in more spaces. So this slide is just an example of some of the recommendations or some of the flavor of what is coming out. So the recommendations focus on really embedding sustainability and resilience into a broad range of MBTA activities. So from planning to analysis to how we go about design and thinking about like just our internal processes to communication, better articulating our funding and our workforce needs that are going to be that we're going to need in place in order to support these climate efforts. So the next steps will really be informing the sort of new team's work as we move forward to ensure that our activities across the authority are really in alignment with the Commonwealth's climate goals. So I guess to just wrap things up, that we've made significant progress, but implementing the result of this assessment is going to require really strong relationships and continued coordination with a very broad range of partners. So we're going to need support from utilities to modernize the grid and plan for adequate power to support that electrification activity. We're going to need to coordinate with a lot of our agency partners across the Commonwealth to implement some of these recommendations, as well as strong internal coordination. So the main thing though is this is gonna cost us. So as we complete the analyses, we're really going to be trying to understand what the costs are associated with achieving net zero, also looking at the benefits and sort of the reasons why we should be doing this. And so we'll be seeking sort of more funding from partners to implement projects and programs that are required to achieve a resilient and carbon neutral system. And so but as part of that, it's not just about funding, it really is about that deep collaboration. So we're going to be wanting to sort of reach out, collaborate with state, but also our municipal partners, with regional organizations, with the advocacy and research community. And as part of all that, really just continue to position the MBTA as a solution to meeting the Commonwealth's climate goals. And as we work to continue to improve our service by providing that low carbon transportation set of options to more members of the traveling public. So we'll be continuing to update the sort of MBTA board about sort of the T's climate work. Happy to come back here as well. and really looking forward to continuing to build things out in terms of when you might expect to see an actual assessment. We're at the draft stage when we took it before the board, which is why some of those recommendations are just examples of types of recommendations. I've been working really hard to try to sort of get it over the finish line. I am hoping to have a release of the actual report later this summer. Sometimes it takes a lot to get something out the door, but really hoping to be able to get that over the finish line soon so that we can actually just continue to be in deeper conversation. So gonna leave it there. Happy to start any sort of discussion or go through any questions or yeah, let's get the conversation going.
This was great. I really appreciate you being here and sharing all this information. Um, I have a lot I have a lot of comments and questions, but I'll kick it over to anyone else want to go before
Well,
me?
if you don't mind, Susan, I just want to quickly introduce Professor Serena
Oh,
Alexander,
right.
who's a professor of public policy and environmental engineering at Northeastern. We have a mutual friend in common and just got connected, and so I invited her to join us today. And in terms of collaboration, Kat, there you go. So, Serena, welcome, and I don't know if you want to just say hi.
So much for introducing me. I'm happy to help, very excited. I'm new at Northeastern. I came from California where I collaborated with the regional transportation agencies on climate issues. And I'm very much interested in bringing students to this so that, if you need to collect more data, for example, the students can get engaged. I also served as a visiting scholar of climate policy at USDOT's Office of Transportation before I joined Northeastern. So I'm very much involved in issues related to climate and resilience, and I'm just happy to be a part of this work if possible.
Nice to meet you.
Sure, we'll be taking you up on that, Serena. Thank you. Susan, thank you.
All right. No, thank you. Well, then I'll start unless I don't see any hands raised.
No,
So
I have
Stephen, go
questions
ahead. I
too.
apologize.
Yeah, well, hi. I noticed something you left out there is as you're reducing carbon output in the air, you're also reducing other kind of pollutants like NOx and particulate matter. So you didn't mention that. That's like a big benefit, I think, that you just
Yeah,
mentioned.
I would agree. I would say that this climate assessment is pretty, so my team's focus is pretty narrowly focused on everything that's like carbon and resilience focused. We do have a large environmental department that is already present, and air quality management is definitely part of their activities. And I think that's to the point I was trying to make around sort of there's going to be some analysis as to what this is all going to cost, but as part of that, we also want to talk about the benefits. Some of those benefits include sort of those sort of co-benefits like air quality improvement. So that's definitely an important component. And I think it's also something that has shown up in some of the planning that's already happened for some of our assets. So an example of that I think is bus electrification, where air quality was one of the benefits that was recognized as being important. And so the way that they've thought about sequencing out bus electrification and facility modernization is trying to think about like, okay, which facility serves which lines and who is served by those lines, because in recognition that there's a benefit for those communities, and we should be thinking about environmental justice communities and how we can deliver those benefits sooner. So it's definitely part of how we're thinking about things. So I appreciate you putting a finer note on it. I managed Boston's Air Pollution Control Commission in a former life, and yeah, I've done a lot of work on air quality. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Stephen. It's definitely an important and sort of tightly connected benefit. Getting cars off the road, also big air quality benefit.
Yeah, and now, so the other thing I had was the percentages, going back to one of those slides there. What you listed transportation as what, 38% of the
It's
pollution? Or
yeah, it was around 37%. That's in
37?
2020. Yeah. It was
Okay, I keep
fiscal
hearing,
year 2020.
yeah, so I keep hearing 40%, but that's okay. But you
People
said
they might be rounding up,
yeah,
but it
yeah.
could be that we're also using different years.
So
Yeah.
and your 2% was really actually 1.6. So that's a big difference when you right.
Yeah, and we're I know that the state is has, I believe, recently released its 2021 inventory, so we're very interested to see how that's changed.
Yeah, so but the important thing on that, on the math, the math, that's 1.6 of the 37%, which is
Mm-hmm.
not of the total. So that makes, so it's looking like the T is not as big a problem as you would expect. Even as big as it is, it's still all these things that would be done at great expense. Still, overall, doesn't contribute as much as you would think it would to the problem here.
Yeah, that was a big learning for me too. And I think that that's part of why even achieving a state of good repair and restoring confidence in the service and encouraging people to ride, that's why it is all the more of a climate solution. The impact of the T is already it's relatively small in terms of climate, but in terms of being able to help people to have alternatives to driving single occupancy vehicles, that's really the big power
Yeah,
here. And so achieving a state of good repair is also a climate initiative because it's just reinforcing the T's role as offering an alternative to
so
driving.
just getting people out of cars onto the T might be as significant as all the other work that the T is
Yeah,
doing.
that's why we're really always trying to sort of talk about this and include the reference to the importance of mode shift and for us to retain our existing riders, but also attract new riders.
Yeah, but it's sort of,
Yeah.
that's a good thing, because not only you're just spending money just to do these specific things, but you have to continue to overall make the service better in order to attract the
Mm-hmm.
riders. So it's the overall T spending on everything that the T does that needs to be improved in order to achieve that.
I won't disagree with you there.
Okay, good.
Um,
I'm done.
thank you, Stephen. Brian, did you want to go or do you want me to go?
Well, I have several questions, but sure, if you don't mind, Susan, I'll go. So
Okay.
Kat, again, thank you for this today. Um, so the advisory board in its CIP oversight report sort of called attention to several facts, which I know you're aware of. You know, the fact that the power plant is below sea level on the, you know, reserve channel. Charlestown is on a river. Riverside is on a river. Orient Heights Yard is really vulnerable. Um, you know, not to mention Wellington is on a river. So lots of the T's assets are vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And if the T is part of the solution to climate change, not, or I should say part of the solution to mitigating climate change, not a factor, not a cause of. I think Steve was just sort of saying that. And I think we all agree on that. Sometimes the T gets blamed for being part of the problem. And I appreciate what you're saying. So, you know, how can your cities and towns, how can we as activists sort of help elevate your message, especially around the vulnerability of these critical assets? I mean, Orient Heights, if Orient Heights goes, the blue line's done. If Wellington goes, the orange line's done. I mean, you know all this stuff.
Yeah.
Um, you know, how can we help magnify and amplify what your work and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think, and I don't have a clear answer yet. I think so. Some of what we're hoping to do, particularly in the planning space, is take a lot of what we've learned about the vulnerability of our assets in those vulnerability assessments and actually build out a little bit more of a true climate resilience roadmap. Folks may have seen the roadmap. New York City MTA just put out a really excellent climate resilience roadmap. It's fairly concise. It's really clear about what they're trying to get done. And so that was part of this work was also sort of looking at like peers and what are some best practices and what's some good work that some of our peer agencies have done recently. And that certainly is it's a really great document. And so I would encourage folks to take a look at that. Let me know if you have feelings about it. But I think we as an organization will need to do a better job of also communicating out what we view as really the critical needs and what we think the order of operations is. For some of those assets, we have we have already taken stock of sort of when we think those vulnerabilities are going to hit, and we've already started taking measures to protect them. Or we have sort of studies underway that will give us the tools that we need to look at solutions. So for example, we're doing a drainage study at Orion Heights. That's something that we've been updating the Belle Isle Marsh Working Group on pretty consistently. We are going to be launching a vulnerability assessment for Cabot Yard. So kind of down in the Fort Point Channel. And sort of trying to think about, okay, if these are places where there might be fringe flooding starting in the 2030s, what are sort of some shorter term shoring up solutions that we can do? For some locations, we're also just going to be relocating. I believe Wellington is one of those one of the location of a bus facility where I think we're just relocating that facility, but I should double check that before I spout off nonsense. So, or I know that certainly there is a yard in Lynn that is already very hazardous also on a river, and that one we definitely are relocating. So for some of these assets, we will be shifting them to other locations that ideally will also be stronger fits from a resilience standpoint. I would say that as part of that, we're also I also want us to be really clear about what it is that the MBTA needs and sort of how it's approaching resilience, so that as I think there are so many municipalities that are engaging deeply in adaptation planning and very often haven't necessarily known how to think about resilience in the MBTA context and what it is that the MBTA is looking for. And so for us to be able to sort of be more publicly out there and be able to put out sort of a statement of principles of like, this is how the MBTA is approaching resilience and is that its assets. I think that just helps give a little bit more of like a playbook for how folks can talk to us and engage with us and how to make sure that as they're planning for their own coastlines or their own sort of riverbeds, essentially, if there are MBTA assets there, how the MBTA is already thinking about it so that they can sort of factor that into their planning and give that as an input to folks that are building out those plans so that there's a little bit more alignment seated from the get-go. And then ideally, we're sort of going out and being able to advocate for some of these measures together. I think sort of thinking, it was great to see that announcement yesterday about some communities on the North Shore coming together to form a union around climate resilience. So that I think that's a great example of one where that really does make things a little bit easier for us because, you know, our T lines span watersheds, we span geographies. And so going community by community can be really challenging when sometimes our lines might go across many communities. And so being able to work in a coalition model, I think is really exciting. And so that's definitely something where we're going to be able to start leaning in a little bit more. But ultimately, I think it's once we sort of identify and are being a little bit more public and communicative about where those priorities are, I think being able to take them on as shared priorities is really important and powerful. Some of those we already have some game plans for, or we're sort of having the inklings of one already working in community a little bit. And so being able to sort of build that out and expand that out and then be able to sort of adopt them as shared priorities, I think works to both of our benefits because ultimately those stops and those lines are there to serve your communities. And so how can we make sure that we can continue to serve your communities for longer?
Right.
But I think that's part of our goal as well. You'll see under the communication section is a little bit more about yeah, essentially how it is that we can be stronger partners and collaborators.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I've really appreciated this. So I have a comment and a couple questions.
Yeah.
First off, absolutely love your slide. I think it was slide 7, where you mentioned this 37% of emissions and how we've been talking about it inaccurately in regards to like, you know, and even people working in transit, I've heard them saying this. It makes it sound like it's transit's fault, right? I think we have to much even farther outside the MBTA find a way to just change that conversation, you know, at the federal, state, and local level. So thank you for highlighting that here. And then on your goals, your 8 goals, I also appreciated how you called out, you know, in increasing trips, you know, the mode shift is really an important part of the sustainability too. And I noticed, I think there were like 3 or 4, or at least 3 of the goals highlight better service, better connectivity, you know, frequency, dependable, frequent, accessible service, you know, increasing the trips. So my question is, I would imagine all of us here hope we can clean and green our transit and get all the service we could possibly want, right? Sometimes
Hmm.
we don't get everything we want,
Yeah.
or I will remain hopeful.
Mhm.
But has anyone done an analysis on if we can't get everything we want, is it better for us to put our dollars into better service rather than greener service? Meaning like, do we invest? I know we already have plans, by the way, and I'm not against those plans, right, for battery electric buses and rail electrification. I'm just wondering, since so many people are begging for more service and we see what's happened to our roads,
Yeah.
has anyone done an analysis? If we don't have the money to make it green, should we still be adding it? And would that also help us reduce our emissions?
Um, I would say that that's the couple $1 billion question. So I think ultimately, yeah, trying to make the point that like service existing equals green, more service, more green. So it's just green in a different way. And I think it's
Hmm.
you're absolutely right that sustainability shows up in our goals in a lot of different ways. It's not just that goal around increasing sustainability just because it has sustainability in the goal language itself.
Yeah.
It is also around being able to make it easier for people to take transit.
So,
Um,
but we maybe don't have that sort of data where we could
I,
show that exactly, or
No, I not
okay,
as far as I'm aware has somebody sort of
okay.
crunched the numbers in that way. I would say that we're
Mhm.
already in that environment where we don't have enough money to do everything that we want.
Yeah.
And so that's, and we're already seeing that show up in the bus facility modernization plan, where planning for these facilities is complicated. It takes time. I think a lot of it, we've seen some unexpected costs come up because when you electrify a facility, you're adding a lot of batteries. Batteries raise a lot of eyebrows when it comes to life and safety concerns. So we've had to have major upgrades for a bunch of the other infrastructure at
Mhm.
these facilities. It's not just about popping in a couple chargers and putting and upgrading your electrical panel.
Right.
And so a lot of these projects have ended up, I think, this is sort of what always happens, but in this instance, we're really actually doing something new that we're not used to. And so it's not something that we necessarily have
Yep.
known how to cost appropriately from the
Hmm.
get-go. So we're trying to go for after as much funding so that we're able to sort of mitigate that cost increase as much as we can. But I think that is something that we're already seeing where, we're from the original schedule that was laid out in the bus electrification plan for like facility modernization. I look over there because I always have it here. We're already off that original schedule,
Yeah.
which is deeply frustrating. I think it was something that was really carefully thought through, and we wouldn't have adopted that goal and really like gone for it unless we thought we could do it. But I think part of it is that there is not sufficient funding at
Hmm.
this time for some of those mandates. And so being able to that's sort of there's it's a balancing act
Hmm.
between sort of the needs of being able to achieve a baseline state of good repair and then where it is that you put your expansion dollars. That's a lot of how the capital investment plan is structured, right? Between sort of state of good repair and expansion. And some of these projects, a lot of sort of like the greening of the system can be built into state of good repair. So it could just be
Hmm.
about shifting how you're doing those state of good repair projects.
Hmm.
Um, but very often, whenever we try to do something that's sort of green, it can really balloon the cost of
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah.
An example of that is lighting, where
Hmm.
you might discover like, oh, we wanted to make this LED, but oh, we found out that all this other stuff is actually ungrounded, and actually there's also this other problem. And now this project is switching LEDs, which normally like LEDs is supposed to be like low hanging fruit if you're in the building sector. In the transportation sector, whew, that's not low hanging.
No,
There's a lot that comes
yeah,
into
and I
it.
appreciate that you also called out like the energy needs, right? There's so many people transitioning to electric, whether it be vehicles or housing or what have you. those needs are growing faster than we've been able to produce the energy. And we don't want to transition to something that's going to give people less reliable service, right? Because then again, that's not green if they're just jumping, in their cars. So
Yeah.
it's
I
it's
mean,
a
the other thing
balancing
is
act.
that a lot of that sort of discretionary grant funding that's out there, or a lot of funding for like electrification, a lot of it is for like the vehicles and the
Vehicle.
chargers themselves. There's not as much funding available for all the like back of house investments that need to be able to
Right.
be that need to be made in order to be able to enable
Yeah.
electrification. So that might be shifting. We've been saying that a lot and starting to see more funding sources sort of consider a lot more of those sort of like those indirect costs of doing these initiatives.
So two last things.
Mm.
Okay, so one, you mentioned how municipalities are working on sort of like climate action plans and so forth, and the town I work for has done that, and ours was through MAPC, and so I'm kind of curious, have you worked with MAPC on this? Because I know, honestly, transit, we kind of had to push for like transit in the discussion. So I think that would be interesting. To explore, but the last point was related to what Brian said, kind of like a what we can do, but also when we're talking to our public, our committees that are working on climate and transportation, what would you like us to tell them? Like if you had like just a few key takeaways that would be helpful in all of this, because there's a lot here and it can be very overwhelming. What would be your few takeaways for people that want to see change?
Mm.
What can they do? What should I tell them? How do we bring them on
Um,
board?
mm, it's a very good question. And that's one of the things I'm still trying to think through. I think generally to ride transit, I know that sometimes that's not
No.
always a great option, but that
Mhm.
that is sort of like, I think I'm really trying to sort of share that message that transit is a climate solution and sort of encouraging folks to do that, there are so many ways that individuals can be sort of advocates in their larger life as well, whether it be sort of like talking to their employer about having sort of commuter benefits. And um, I think that there's space there for it to have sort of like a larger impact beyond just like the individual act of riding transit.
Mhm.
Um, the sort of macro piece is to um, participate in processes. Our capital investment plan goes out for public comment every year. um, Being able to sort of share, and there's lots of other opportunities to engage in some of our planning, and being sort of participants in that, sharing their feedback and opinions it does matter. um, and then I think from a macro standpoint, understanding that I think the challenge with funding transit is that these are sort of large infrastructure projects, and they take seeing the fruit of your labor and seeing the fruit of your investment can yield time. But I think helping people understand where the benefit is and being able
Mhm.
to potentially point to instances where something took a while, but then once it happened, the impact was great. So I'm still new, so I'm learning all the different potential examples. But I mean, you know, Green Line extension, that was a project that took a long time to deliver, it took a while to get things right, but yeah, we've seen tremendous ridership growth. And it really is showing that there was a need. And so it's been creating an alternative for a whole set of communities that had bus service, but now have sort of the benefit of being able to take a rapid transit service straight into the heart of downtown. It really it has been having a transformative effect for a lot of those sort of sections of the communities that are served by that line. So that's a rapid transit example. Maybe there's something more around sort of once bus
Good.
network redesign rolls out, being able to share some of how people sort of understand that like there's a long lead time, but we're working really hard to sort of deliver things.
Can I give you an example of where these things work together? Is with
Oh yeah.
rail electrification. Not only are you cleaning up the air, but you're providing better service because the greater acceleration, so it cuts down the travel time and going to trains more, smaller trains running more often, that you can get with electrification, that provides a better service. So you're getting both at the same time, the cleaner air and the climate change effect and getting better ridership.
Yeah, appreciate you naming them. And of course, we're going to be working on that on a pilot for the Fairmount line as a starting point, but also trying to see other ways that we can continue to decrease our
Yeah.
impact.
And I always, whenever you say, yeah, the Fairmont line, yeah, yes, the Fairmont line is very important, but the fact that you have catenary already there in place on the Providence line, you think you should better get
I
that
think the challenge for that is
fast.
the catenary is only over some of the track, not all of the track. So there's still, for all of these, there's a major, major investment that would need to happen. So I think it always comes back down to dollars and being able to have access to maybe some other sort of creative models to be able to make some of these changes.
Yeah, but with the battery electric approach, then if there's some place where you don't, when you're missing the catenary, that should be able to solve that problem easily.
I think the concern
I've been
there is
hearing.
wind. We are really concerned with like high wind speeds for things like hurricanes. So that's just
Yeah.
naming in our vulnerability assessments, wind is something that comes up as a real major concern and something that Western Europe doesn't have hurricanes in the way that we do, at least not at this time. But appreciate you naming the potential for regional rail electrification.
That's my big topic because I'm on that one.
Yeah, and it looks like we'll be discussing that in a little bit
Oh, of
more on
course.
regional rail.
Yeah, I hate to bring it up. I usually try to avoid this because it's a little bit, I don't know. It's the North-South Rail Link project is something that will unify the whole rail system and would provide such better service and the additional places you can go to from would be such a increase in available service that's
Steve, we're getting
something.
a little off topic here. Why
I
don't
know,
we,
see right
we-
away.
why don't we,
I mentioned that
why
one and that's what happens.
why don't we
But
go back to Susan?
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually do have a hard stop at 10, but I could talk about this for a much longer time. So I guess anything else for Kat, and otherwise we'd move on. And
Serena, do you have any questions or anything you wanted to say?
I do have a question, yes. So I think one of the biggest way that we can kind of contribute to sustainability and mitigation of emissions is ensuring equitable access to transit. And you did talk about that a little bit, Kat. So I just want to learn more about it, especially the relationship between housing and access to transportation. Housing costs are really high these days, so I've seen a lot of new developments happening at the edges of either the commuter rail or completely in places that do not have much access to transit. So I wonder if there are any efforts to kind of collaborate to ensure that housing and provision of housing is happening in areas that are that can have better access to transit.
Thank you for that question. So I really can only speak to sort of what is within the MBTA scope. So I will note that we do have sort of a real estate department that works on transit-oriented development. So trying to leverage MBTA-owned assets certainly in order to build housing projects. An example of a project that sort of is in the works is sort of, for example, the Alewife Garage, which has been a garage for about 40, 50 years and is going to be the subject of a large redevelopment. So really trying to think about how we can better leverage our own assets in order to be able to support building dense housing near transit. So it is certainly something that we believe is supportive of our larger initiatives. At sort of a larger Commonwealth level, there's also the MBTA Communities Act, which even though it has MBTA in its name, it really isn't necessarily about action by the MBTA. It's more so sort of calling on the larger region to take action. So yeah, but it's certainly the connection between housing and transit is incredibly important. And I think that's where there's also connections to the efforts of other RTAs as well to be able to sort of build in stronger connections to regional transit hubs.
I just
Thank you.
noting we have about 7 minutes and a couple more things to get through. Steve, do you have a quick question?
Yeah, one quick thing. Are you thinking about, since you just mentioned parking garages, putting solar panels on the top level of parking garages? Is that a thing you're thinking about?
If it continues to be an MBTA owned asset, it's something that we consider. There's sort of, we're figuring out a lot of things and sort of in our
Yeah.
role as sort of an energy generator and energy actor. But for example, we have solar panels on top of the Oregon Heights MBTA station. And we're putting them on top of Quincy.
Okay, but you have Route 128, you have the, Wellington and what you just mentioned, the Airway
Well,
station.
that will no longer be a parking garage, but yes,
Oh,
where
okay,
we have
okay.
opportunities, we
Oh, yeah,
definitely do
I'm
examine
not up on that one. Okay, thank you.
that.
Susan, if I might very briefly, Kat, I just want to introduce you to Isabella McKinnon, who's here. She is interning for the advisory board. She started this week, and
Oh,
she just graduated from GW and hopes to have a career in environmental policy and climate change mitigation. So
nice.
you guys should definitely connect at some point.
All right. Sounds good.
Susan.
Great. And well, I think we can't really approve minutes, right? Because there's just 2 of us here. So we'll table that for another time, which looks like October, I suppose. Were this item proposed meeting topics? Did you want us to propose meeting topics, or you just want us to discuss upcoming meetings?
Oh,
Or kind
why
of
don't
open
you want
either
to,
one?
should we say goodbye to Kat and
Oh,
thank
yes,
her?
sure.
Kat, thank
Yes.
you. We're going to
Thank you.
talk about committee business, so you're welcome to stay.
Yeah,
Appreciate that. Thank you. Have a
Whatever
good
things
rest of your
to-
day. Thank you for having me.
sorry. Thank you,
Thank you
Kat.
Thank
so
you.
much. Have
Bye.
a nice
Thank you.
rest of your day.
Yeah, so I'm interested in getting feedback from everybody on topics, frequency. Do we want to do this more often? Do we want to do this less often? Obviously, getting folks to show up has been a challenge.
Yeah.
So, I'm open to suggestions.
And I do apologize for the last minute change. Thank you for accommodating this move to 9. Personally, what Kat just shared, I would love to dive deeper into this. I'm not sure, how much we can reasonably do. And honestly, I only have so much bandwidth as well. But I feel like we're really getting somewhere. Like, to me, this is really important. We have to figure out, again, I'm all for greening it. Like, I wouldn't be on this committee if I weren't. We have to find the right balance and what's doable and what are we fighting for? It's that advocacy piece. I just, I know what we have in our operating budget report and our CIP report. It's just like really putting it all together into the nitty gritty. I feel like there's, I don't know, something that has to get done more specifically on this, but
Yeah, and
I don't have it in my brain yet.
well, yeah, I don't think anyone has really figured that piece of it out yet. I am excited to, we're going to be onboarding a new full-time employee in 2 weeks who's
Mm,
going to really being able to do a lot more deeper dives into this stuff. It's really just been a bandwidth question with me. But she'll be able to kind of work more closely with the committees to get more done. And
okay.
I'm very excited for her to start. So maybe we could, I could connect you and her. Her name is Hannah Swideltowski. She's a select board member in Sharon. Once she gets onboarded, and you guys could sort of brainstorm a little bit.
Okay.
So
Sounds good.
I think what we learned today, again, is the funding situation. If we could fund a better running,
Yep.
more efficient T, you are getting that climate improvement. They go hand in hand. So
That's
when
what it's all about.
when you're promoting all this funding for the T, I think that's something that needs to be emphasized, that not only are you getting better service, automatically by getting people out of their cars, you're getting climate resiliency and improvement there.
And
Absolutely.
the thing I brought up at our other meetings, the messaging, the advocacy piece, I know it's not all on the MBTA advisory board, but like how we partner with other groups, like, and all work in the same direction together,
Right.
I think is really important. So,
No,
okay.
I completely hear you on that, Susan. That's something else that Hannah's going to be working on is that
Oh,
messaging
great.
piece and the political connection piece. She's got a ton of connections
Perfect.
up on Beacon Hill. So yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
That's great. Okay, so then it looks like we've got some planned upcoming meetings. Looks good to me. Stephen or anyone have anything else, or can we go ahead and adjourn?
I think we're good. Unless you guys want
Good.
me to sing. No, nobody wants that.
No, but yeah, some other time. All
But
right.
Brian, I just
Then
wanted to speak to you more about your work on the funding committee.
I'll call you in a minute, Steve.
Okay, great.
okay. Wasn't sure if you guys wanted to stay on. Okay, so I guess do we really need
All
to do
right.
the motion to adjourn? But okay, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all so much. Take care.